Good day, everyone. I hope you are all well, wherever you might be in the world. Good evening to some of you, depending what time you're watching this. Welcome back to the channel. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk about object relations theory. Now, the lady you see up on the screen before you is a lady called Melanie Klein, and she is the main proponent or originator of this particular theory. It is a theory that develops out of the psychoanalytic tradition, sort of that then has its roots ultimately in a gentleman known as Sigmund Freud. Now, I believe that while Sigmund Freud had a lot of good ideas and a lot of very peculiar ideas, I believe Melanie Klein actually took the ball and ran with it in a much more sensible direction, and we have a lot to thank her for in terms of when it comes to psychoanalytics, how we study childhood development and all of these kinds of things, and how and the way that our experiences and traumas and things like that in our infancy already, right? So you're looking at from the ages of 0 to 4. That's how young you're looking at. And how that solidifies certain things in your mind and in your character, your sense of who you are and all that kind of stuff. And then how that then echoes throughout the rest of your life. Now, the reason I am doing this video is, first of all, because I don't only want to do theology and Christian stuff on my channel. I want to talk about a whole bunch of different kinds of things that I, as an individual, would have liked to have known long time ago, right? But primarily, the video comes actually by request. I was talking to an autistic person who is very close to me, right? Very, very close to me. I love this individual dearly. And this individual means a lot to me and stuff like that. And we often have long conversations, as much as we can, about all kinds of things. And I discussed object relations theory with this individual, and as a report, this individual said, "Listen, Morgan, you know what? Talk about even though you're not a psychologist, etc., etc. Like, I'm not talking to this person on a professional level at all, just as a friend and all that kind of stuff." But this person says, "Listen, this really helped me understand other people, because for anyone that knows anything about autistic people knows straight away that they really battle in interpersonal relationships, isn't it? And the psychoanalytic theory of Melanie Klein's genius was to come away from Freud's presupposition that our base drives, right, the eros and the thanatos, our creative sexual drives versus our aggressive drives, she reckons that is not the primary impetus, the primary thing for human beings. The primary thing for human beings is in fact the relational dimension, how we relate to each other, and so on. And I believe she's absolutely correct. Not that the rest is irrelevant, right? We have to deal with those things. But this is the problem that most people today, and we're seeing this on an increase, right? You ask any psychologist, and they will tell you we are seeing skyrocketing increases in all kinds of personality problems in human beings, the inability for human beings to interact with each other and stuff like that. And we're seeing drastic increases in personality disorders like narcissism, like psychopathy, sociopathy, and borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, codependent and so on and so forth, right? Schizoids and all kinds of things. Like, people are really going completely, they're out of their minds. And as a result, you know, suicide rates are increasing, and so on and so forth. And people are beginning to recognize that first of all, as it seems that globally the highest amount of suicides seem to be in the West. And so this leads people to, which is crazy, right? Is not only in the West, but is among men, okay? Is among men. And people look at this, and not that women are unaffected. So, for example, women attempt suicide much more regularly than men do. The difference is men are much more successful at actually committing suicide than women are. So, so next time you're dealing with a feminist, tell them men are even men are even more successful at killing themselves. But that's a bit of a distasteful joke, is it? Is it? Who knows? Anyway, so, and they see that this is happening in the West, and people are beginning to conclude, and we've long suspected this, that the material wealth does not actually make you happy. It doesn't give meaning. If anything, and we see this rising critique of social media and media in general, that the material wealth is actually hindering the interpersonal relationships, and as well as this constant need for driving people to professional occupation in order to earn money, in order to get things and stuff like that, so that all of the other things in life that are meaningful, namely relationships, get then pushed to the wayside. And feminism has actually been one of the biggest factors in terms of this, where feminism is telling women, listen, forget about relationships and all that kind of stuff and focus on your career. And then women are waking up in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they find that they're alone. There's no meaningful relationships in their lives whatsoever. And they fall into depression, and life's an absolute misery. And men are finding that as well, and the whole thing has been a disaster, because the whole ideology of the world is nothing but rat race. Go rat race, go chase the dollars, chase the pounds, and everything else needs to be set aside. And women specifically are being encouraged to set all of these things aside. In fact, feminism goes so far as to say that these things are illegitimate, right? So if a woman actually decides to prioritize the personal life over the professional life, she's actually then ostracized and looked down on as a fool and a moron, and why aren't you aiming for CEO and all that kind of stuff. And we see that this has had absolutely no good whatsoever in society. And so my friend with autism said, listen, you need, because it helped me when it helped. My friend was like, it helped me understand why I am battling with things, and helps me understand. Then it gives, because the thing with people with autism is they've got a very literalistic, almost a mathematical, computational brain. They're very, very, very literalistic, and abstractions are very, very difficult for them, right? And object relations is in fact a very abstract thing that goes on in the mind and all that kind of stuff. And that's why they then struggle with interpersonal relationship, because there's all kinds of abstract cues and social conventions and stuff like that just go right over their heads, and they really, really struggle with that. And it's not just autistic people, it's all kinds of people. So you'll generally find that people with ADHD struggle socially as well. There's a lot of problems socially because and there's reasons for that, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. So going on my friend's recommendation and how much it helped her, right? Like, get these things, the ducks in a row and stuff like that in this regard. She's like, please explain. Now, I am not a psychologist. I'm not trained, just like everything else in my videos. I'm just talking because I find it interesting and because I want to introduce the subject, however imperfectly. And I'm going to give you links, and you need to go research for yourself because it could help you. Do you have, like, and this really helps you understand certain things. Why do I have a problem with authority? Why do I have a problem? Why am I afraid of relationships? Why am I afraid of other people, of going out in certain social situations? Why do I react unreasonably towards X and Y and Z and all these kinds of things? Why does that person behave in the way they do? And object relations theory really, even if imperfect, right? Because criticisms for and against can be said about everything, even if imperfect, is very practically very helpful. I find it myself as someone who's got ADD and Tourette's and stuff like that, and there's issues, there's other issues as well. It helped me understand what I'm doing internally and how to get it. Anyway, so let's dive into it. So what is object relations? Now, when we're talking about object, right? Object, we're not necessarily talking about object as in this microphone or this pen or object. We're talking about, and in a sense we are, and in a sense we aren't, right? So, but by object, we're talking about the other person as an object in my mind, and even my own personal identity as an object inside me, within me, right? So, for example, you have the person. I'm going to draw the head rather large here. So you've got a person, right? And we are social beings, okay? We are social beings, right? So, interpersonal relationships, right? 99.999% of your experiences in the world, whether you like it or not, is going to be interpersonal. That is what the human dimension consists of. It's me and you and your neighbor and the guy down the road and the girl at the counter and whatever the case might be. Right, now, an object relations is how in my mind do I perceive this other person, right? So how do I perceive the other person? So this person as a whole, right? Let me erase that there for practical purposes. So I will have person inside me, and that person is I've got the concept in my mind of who this individual is, right? Who this person is in my mind. So for example, let's say someone does something that you didn't expect and you're surprised by what they've done. Why are you surprised? The reason you are surprised is not because they've necessarily done something surprising, but because what the person has done does not match up with the internal object, the internal representation that you have of that individual. Okay? That's one aspect, right? Is who is that person, right? Who that person is. So you have that internal object of the person, all right? And then me, and then there's me. There's the internal object me, right? So it's the other person and me, and then how the two objects relate to each other, right? Who am I compared to that person? Who's that person compared to me, right? My internal object, me. Who am I? Okay? Now, if the person behaves in a way that is surprising, how does a healthy person behave, right? So let me forget the bodies, right? So this is our head, right? Imagine this is your mind. So you've got the other person, and you've got yourself, you've got me, the person and me, and you've got the object, right? You've got these two objects within you, and they relate to each other, okay? They relate to each other. Now, let's say this person behaves in a way that contradicts that, okay? So you have a bit of a, you're surprised, okay? They've done something, you're surprised by it, okay? They've done, I'm going to do it in red, because they've done something out of the ordinary that doesn't really belong. What does a healthy person do? A healthy person will inquire, right? Will inquire, right? Well, why did you do this? Is this really a part of who you are? And we'll do the investigation, okay? The person will then, the external object, right? So this is the external object. The external object will say, yeah, this was a one-off freak thing. I don't even know what, and so, and in that case, the person will not update the internal model. But in the sense that the other person's like, yeah, I've always been that way, I just never showed this side of myself to you, then a healthy person will go back and will update the model, so that they will come back and they will update the model, right? They will update the model, and this will influence how they relate to you. Because let's say I enjoy football. I never knew you enjoyed football. I discovered that you enjoy football. Now I relate to you in a different way, essentially speaking, right? And so we relate to each other, and then that's then how it works. That's how it works in a healthy person. In a healthy person, we've got that representation of the external objects, my mother, my father, my cousins, my co-workers, whatever the case might be. And we are in a healthy person is always updating the model, and then as a consequence, that model is always updating how you relate, how the two objects relate, my internal self and your internal self. Now, a healthy person will also, right, a healthy person will also constantly update the internal model of what is me, who am I, right? And who am I in relation? So let's say there's other people, there's other objects, as it were, right? And then these objects, all of these objects are represented inside the person. So we've got many, many, many objects, right? And we relate to all of them, right? And they all help me update who I am, in a sense, right? Because if everyone here is telling you that you're stupid, what will you eventually realize? You will think you're stupid, right? Your internal model will be updated. I'm stupid. I'm a bad object. I'm a stupid object. And you will take that on board. And then your relation to everyone else will be, that'll affect how you relate to, because if my internal object of me is that I'm stupid, then I will interact with all these objects as stupid. So before I've even gone to the outside reality, I've already made the certain assumptions, right? So for example, a person who's convinced that they're stupid will in their mind relate themselves to the external object and say, because I'm stupid, I will relate this way, and that person's going to think I'm stupid because everyone's telling me I'm stupid. Therefore, I won't even bother. And so they've already had their minds made up before they even interact with the other person, and the person might like you, right? And this is one of the apprehensions that we have. Are those people going to really like me? Because in that sense, you're hoping that they like that your internal object, that you're a nice, likable person, is true, and that the other people are gonna. So all of our interactions are interrelational, okay, as it were. So, but now the primary relationship, according to Melanie Klein and all that sort of thing, is like the primary relationship is me and mother. Mom. Is me and mother. 0 to 4, right? 0 to 4. So, the infant, right? For the infant, me and mom are the same thing, right? Me and mom are the same thing. There's no external object, right? Mom doesn't exist out here, right? And so when you are for example, let's say when you playing peekaboo with a child, right? You're playing peekaboo with a child. You are playing with what is called object permanence, right? So if the child doesn't see you, as far as the child's concerned, you've ceased to exist, okay? Right? And that's why when you come into exist, so when you're playing peekaboo with a child, one of the reasons why the child gets completely ecstatic is because as far as they're concerned, you're literally appearing and disappearing just out of nothing. You're vanishing into thin air and suddenly appearing, right? It's also why the child will cry if you are not in the same room with them, because they have not understood that this eternal object is permanent, is out there somewhere. It's you understand what I'm saying? So what happens during the normal course of development, right? So before I get there, so in the normal course of development, there's what we call individuation, right? The child would begin to realize, I am not mom and mom is not me. Mom is actually over there, right? And will begin to call you mom, and when you see sort of in their twos, and what they call the terrible twos, when the child is a bit obstinate, they're trying to discover, what is this? What is this me here? Let me go and do, where do I begin and where does mom end, and all that kind of stuff. And they start becoming and pulling and pushing and all these kinds of things in the world. But even before that, right? So for example, if the mother, let's say the mother is abusive, right? Is abusive, then the child's object that represents themselves, they say, I'm bad object. And they will grow up forever, I am bad object. So there's guilt and shame and all that kind of stuff. I am a bad object because mom beats me up, or mom is not there, or mom is not, whatever the case might be. I'm a bad object. Or the father is not present, the father is unloving, I'm a bad object, this is the thing. Or mom feeds me and mom looks after me, mom is there and talks to me when I want, I'm good object, and so on and so on and so. So this internal object that is me then will develop properly. And in the normal process of individuation, the parent's duty is to let the child know that is a good and valuable, cherished object, a loved object, is a good object, right? First of all, and then make the distinction between you and me. I am an external object and you are the child. We're not the same person. We are not the same person, right? At all. Now, and then once the child understands I am me and you are you, and there's these differences, that's why again, children sort of will try to disobey and try to do this and try to do that and all these kinds of things. The children are exploring the boundaries between themselves. Where do I begin and where do I end? And where does my mother and father begin and where do I end? And that is why that's a very, very careful balancing act when they're in the developmental stages, even from birth, mind you, even from birth, in those developmental stages, where they're trying to figure out who they are and all these kinds of things, where it's necessary for the parent to establish boundaries. So this is why a parent who does not establish boundaries and holds to those boundaries will develop a dysfunctional child who then when they grow up does not understand boundaries. Now we can, for example, let's think, we can talk about abuse. Right? How can we define abuse? Abuse is the violation of boundaries. The violation of boundaries. Okay? Abuse can be defined as the violation of boundaries. What is rape? I have used body as if it's mine, as if it's just an object, as if it doesn't belong to you, as if it doesn't belong to a person. It's the same thing. All abuse is I have crossed the boundary between me and you that should be maintained strictly. I've crossed over without consent. So I've treated you like a non-person, like as if this doesn't exist, right? I have violated this, right? As if it doesn't exist. And I have used and abused you, right? Whether it's physical violence, whether it's verbal violence, whether it's sexual violence, whatever the case might be, all abuse is essentially boils down to the violation of boundaries, which is why, for example, children who have grown up in abusive relationships end up with in the most extreme cases, will end up with personality disorders. And we understand with personality disorders, for example, that there's an issue of boundaries, right? and we see this in general all the time, right? That people do not understand where, so for example, someone that comes and sits right next to you, like completely in your space, it's like, dude, right, boundaries, okay? That's a sense of someone who grew up without boundaries between me and thee properly established, right? And here's the thing, depending on the societies and stuff like that, so how can I say, so a boundary, we can think of it as so for example, here's me, right, as the entity, and then I've got a boundary that is my personal space, right? And depending on how big or how small it is, can vary from culture to culture, person to person, so on and so forth, right? So for example, a person with very, very, very high personality trait openness will have a massive actually no, sorry, I'm wrong, right? A person who's very, very, very high and in openness, for example, will have a highly permeable boundary, right? They like new ideas, new experiences, and especially so high openness, high agreeableness. They like to hug, they like to kiss, they like to hold hands, they like to have new experiences, they like to eat new food, and all of that sort of thing. And generally, such an individual is a liberal, right? If you want to think about politics, generally such an individual is a liberal. However, a person who is low in openness and high in conscientiousness, for example, has got very, very impermeable boundaries. So they might have only one gate, and you can only enter through that one gate for experiences and all that kind of stuff. But generally, they, you know, if they don't like new experiences, right? This is who I am. This is who I'm like. I'm not interested in new ideas. It's what you call a narrow-minded person. Now, you need both in society, okay? You need both in society, sort of thing. So, for example, this is why, for example, a conservative doesn't want open borders, right? No, we need to establish borders. Everything is, you know, if you go to their house, or all their socks and their shirts, and never the twain will cross, okay? Whereas a person who's a bit more high in openness, generally the ones who are high in openness, high in agreeableness, they're like, open the borders, let's have an experience, why not, okay? And both in society have legitimate arguments to make for all sorts of things, because we need all the experiences. Sometimes you need to close the borders, sometimes you need to open them. And there's a discussion that has to be had between them, right? So let's say now a person is so you've got the individual. One of the best ways to understand object relations theory is actually to assess or to look at how the object relations dynamic manifests itself in people with disorders. So let's take a narcissist, for example, narcissism. Narcissism. Now, you need to understand something, right? And about narcissism. So let's the four cluster B personality disorders is narcissism. Narcissism is antisocial, antisocial. It's borderline. Is borderline, and is histrionic. Histrionic, is it I? Is it a I or a Y? It doesn't matter. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, So narcissism, antisocial, borderline, and so narcissism actually, so we need to actually talk about this. Narcissism breaks down into grandiose narcissism, as well as vulnerable. Right? So the grandiose and vulnerable narcissist, so basically grandiose narcissist will manifest as someone who's like, I'm basically God and everyone should obey me because I'm the best, I'm the most wonderful. Okay. The vulnerable, and because they are God, because they're basically God, they're entitled to everything, right? Everyone must just bow and propitiate and give them what they want. Okay. The vulnerable narcissist is similar. They also believe that they deserve everyone's everything, right? You must just bow and propitiate. But because, unlike the grandiose narcissist who says, I'm wonderful, because I'm wonderful, therefore everyone should give me everything, the vulnerable narcissist will say, because I am the victim, therefore everyone should do what I want. Because I'm the victim, I've been so hard done by, therefore you should give me everything and feel sorry for me. So the grandiose plays God, the vulnerable narcissist plays the victim. Okay, but both of them are to the same end because they believe. So so for example, if you look at like some of the really so for example, feminism, basically, right? 99% of feminist rhetoric out there is what? Give me everything because I'm the victim, essentially. I'm the woman, I've been violated, and therefore, and women have been so hard done by, therefore you must just give us everything, whether we deserve it or not, whether we merit it or not, regardless of, we must just. And we see this play out in the world, that women are given preference in terms of work. Women are given preference over the man for a job, even if the man is 100 times more qualified for the job than she is. All right, so merit goes right out the window. The only question is, has the person been a victim? Yes, therefore give them everything. Shame, poor victim. Okay, and the only reason why they play that is because they want power, they want control. It is the power of the victim, basically, and this has become particularly prevalent in modern society, is vulnerable narcissism. Okay, whereas and they both believe that the different and grandiose, the difference between the two is a grandiose narcissist usually has, to a large degree, he's got the goods to back it up. So he's generally is actually quite intelligent, quite adept, almost obsessive at his work. So, which is why most grandiose narcissists will basically be president, or will be CEO, or will be and whatever, because they pursue the power. They want the power, because if I'm wonderful, I should be in the position of, as close to the position of God as possible, because the power allows me to get what I want. It's always about power. It's always a power dynamic. And for the vulnerable narcissist, they don't go in that way necessarily. That's because I'm the victim, and they get the same power. They pursue the same power through the vulnerable, by playing the victim. I should be given, I should, and all this kind of stuff. And they will erect the systems of all society to basically, if I'm the victim, then everyone must just bow down. You're not allowed to question. You're not allowed to question, because if at any point you question whether they really deserve, whether they really should get what they're asking for, if you question it, you will get rage. Nothing but rage, right? Nothing but godly rage. How dare you? I deserve it, because you're right. It's just it's totally, and we're going to get to there how this works out but narcissism as a whole is very is skyrocketing in the world, is absolutely skyrocketing in the world. Then you've got antisocial. In antisocial behavior breaks down, they call it, I think it's type 1 and type 2, but it's basically, it's the psychopath, right? And the sociopath. The difference between the two is the psychopath is born. The psychopath is born, the sociopath is made. The sociopath is made. Right? So this, unlike the psychopath, the sociopath learns to remove all emotions, all empathy, learns to take all of those things, put away and lock it away in a box as if it doesn't exist. Okay? It is a defense mechanism, whereas psychopaths generally are born that way. So true psychopathy is very, 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 very rare. Sociopathy is actually much more prevalent, because kids are being born to abusive families, are being born to very, very hard, underprivileged societies, communities, and so in order to survive, they need to just do what needs to be done. To hell with guilt, to hell with consequence and stuff. So it's actually possible for a sociopath to feel guilt, right? Whereas for the psychopath, it's basically, there's it's actually the part in the brain that's responsible for those responses is like damaged, or it doesn't exist. Okay, that's basically the difference. As a result, unless you could actually go into the psychopath's brain and repair that area, there's no remedy for that, for the psychopath. The psychopath will always be a psychopath, but they can still intellectually access with so these are probably the single most objective person you will ever find is might actually be the psychopath, because they've got no emotion invested in anything at all. All they have is the goal, and I'll do whatever it takes to get the goal. So the difference between a narcissist and a psychopath, the psychopath is willing to be thought of as ignorant as long as people believing he is ignorant benefits him in order to get what he wants. Whereas with the narcissist's goal is to be thought well of, right? There's two completely different goals, right? So for the psychopath, I want money. For the psychopath is, I want money because with money I can get what I want, right? For the narcissist, the narcissist says, I want money because if I have lots of money, people will think well of me. I will be in high society, and it has nothing to do with what he can do actually with the money. He merely wants to get more than the next guy because it means I'm better than him. And if I've got lots of money, then I'm wonderful, and look at me, I'm so successful, and all these kinds of things, and so on and so forth. They actually don't, for the narcissist, the ends is the social credit that he gets, right? Whereas the psychopath couldn't care less about social credit. So all the virtue signalers in the world will fall under narcissism, right? Narcissism and virtue signaling, that's it. So for Christians, so being a Christian channel, would be remiss for me not to talk about it. In Christians, right, the narcissists will always, especially the grandiose narcissists, will always make a beeline for positions of authority. Pastor, elder, deacon, leader of any kind, right? The narcissist will always make a beeline for that, to an absolute beeline towards those positions of authority. And the vulnerable narcissists will be the ones in the church who do nothing but complain. And their complaints are, why? Well, because I'm not satisfied. It's a self-reference, right? It's always me and what I think. There's no objectivity whatsoever. So we can explain this in terms of object relations theory, right? So you have an individual, right? We're talking about an individual. So we have an individual, right? So the individual's got person, right? Is got the object of persons. Persons. Right. For the narcissist, there is nothing. For the narcissist takes all external objects and internalizes it. Right? Internalizes it. So this is why if the narcissist thinks you are X, Y, and Z, you will never change his mind, because the narcissist refuses or is incapable of updating the internal model, because as far as the narcissist is concerned, the internal model dictates the external model. There might as well be nothing. It is the ultimate form of solipsism. What I believe, if I believe it, therefore it is. That is the narcissist, right? They all objects are purely internal objects. There is nothing. The external is irrelevant. Is absolutely irrelevant. Is all completely and utterly internal. And then the individual, the me, right? The me doesn't exist. There's no one there. Right? The reason for this is because when you had the mother, it's got blue. So me and mother, mom. The reason being, right, is that what happens often, let's say you have a narcissistic mother. A narcissistic mother will engulf. Let's actually draw this in a different way. Right, so mom, me. A narcissistic mother will engulf, will subsume the identity of the infant, will not allow the infant to develop their own identity, will not detach, and therefore the child as the inner object does not develop. It is completely subsumed under the personality of the mother. And the personality of the mother, usually if the mother is a narcissist or is uncaring or is a bit psychotic or violent or neglectful, right? It can even just be as mild as neglect, right? So you neglect to either detach. So for sometimes it's not always out of malice. Sometimes it's just by neglect, by pure neglect. The child does not detach. So for example, helicopter mothers, right? They're always hovering, and if the child so much as passes wind in a different direction, the end of the world is nigh. Okay. Helicopter parents. So putting your child up on a pedestal, right, or smashing your child into the ground is has the exact of both abuse. Okay, because the child that is, so the child that's put up on a pedestal or is smashed into the ground, so completely smashed into the ground, the child that is elevated is not elevated to their own identity, right? They're not encouraged to develop their own identity. The identity that they're encouraged to take on is the ideal. Is the ideal of whom? Of the parent. The parental ideal. So, for example, you often hear And the people do movies even and stuff like that, where the child is like, the child goes to university and becomes a doctor. Never wanted to it, but were forced to do it because your dad is a doctor and your dad's dad was a doctor and his dad was a doctor, and you are come from a line of 100 years of physicians, therefore you must be a physician, and your individual identity doesn't exist. And so you are put on this pedestal, and the child and this entire thing is a false self for the child. Is a false self. Now, it doesn't always necessarily go into narcissism, but you do have that. So, which is why narcissism can be quite prevalent in only children. For example, the parents invest everything, they get everything they want, and they believe I am owed, right? And the same thing with the child that is run into the ground. It's also a false self. It's also a false self. But it's not even a false self. It's the parent. It's the parent. The parent is like, you are a bad child. You are an irritating child. You are a misbehaving child. You do nothing but cost me money. You you do nothing but misbehave. You are you did not, woman especially. You did nothing but destroy my body, right? Have you ever heard a mother say that to a child? You just destroyed my body. Look, I've got all of these stretch marks and all of this and this. Look how much I suffered for you, right? Look how much I suffered for you. Therefore, you have no right to develop your individual personality. You have to be what I want you to be. And so the child, the internal object of the child doesn't develop, of the me does not develop at all. And that is how parents pass on. So personality disorders are passed on from parent to child, right? And it happens in that first 4-year period. It's done. It's done, right? From 0 to 4 years. To 4 years, right? Everything is every single thing that you do after the age of 4 will be damage control. That is it. If you screw this up, right? If you screw that up, the rest of the child's life is damage control. End of story. Because this is where the identity and the proper application of internal objects of the child. Who am I? Who are you? Who are you to me? And how do we relate? How do we negotiate? With a narcissist, there's no negotiation. It's their way, or that's it. The narcissist is always completely obsessed with title. Title, because title gives them authority. Gives them authority, and then authority gets them what they call narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply. So, how do you know, for example, that your parent is a narcissist? Your parent is absolutely obsessed with the fact that they are your mother or they are your father, and therefore you should do whatever. You are not entitled to an opinion, right? Absolutely, there is no effort whatsoever to establish a proper parent-child relationship without constantly and incessantly appealing to the fact that because I'm your mother or because I'm your father, therefore. It's always an appeal to title, right? Because the title gives them authority over you, and you are a subject. You are never. So, for example, you understand. So, because the internal object right? Because the internal object, there is only an internal object, right? This parent, when you are like 30 years old, doesn't recognize that. You might as well still be 5 years old. You might as well still be 5 years old, because the model is not updated. The model does not update itself at all. It's only the internal object, right? Only the internal object. And here's the thing: there is never ultimately, okay, in a final sense, there's the me, right? The me. Ultimately, there is a me in there somewhere, but the me is reduced into a tiny little thing, me, down there, and the narcissism is designed to protect that. There's that tiny little me. I am the bad object. I am the horrible object. Guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are the driving impetus for people except for the psychopath, borderline histrionic narcissism. The driving emotions for these people is guilt and shame, right? Because the grandiosity makes me feel like I'm worth something. But they have internalized not who they are, but who their parents said they are. The parent says, I am bad object, therefore I am bad object, and because I am bad object, in order to try and overcome them, I need to project grandiosity and say that I'm wonderful and all that kind of stuff, because I have nothing. I have nothing there. This is undeveloped, and this is the difficult part, right? That we need to understand about people is no one chooses it. No one chooses to be a narcissist. No one chooses to be a psychopath or a sociopath or borderline. No one chooses it. No, and it's unfortunate because there's more. There are 10 personality problems in general, and all of them have a conflict that have to go on here. But the difficult part is specifically the cluster B, which is the highly socially problematic individuals. Is you love to hate them because they're such miserable, wretched sons of guns, right? But they are victims, right? Yes, once they reach into adulthood, then yes, of course, the adult is always responsible for their actions, okay? But essentially, all of these things are defense mechanisms, right? So to summarize, for the narcissist, everything is an internal object. So for a narcissist, person, right? Everything is an internal object, and the internal object informs the external, right? The internal informs the external, and it doesn't come the other way around. There is no updating of the model ever, right? That's why they can't. That's why they don't treat you like a person, like a real person, out in reality, is because you are not out here, right? The person, you're not out here. You're in here. You're an object inside, and you can only have a relationship if there is two real things distinct from each other. Then they can have a relationship. But for the narcissist, this doesn't exist. So it's essentially, ultimately, narcissism is a relationship with the self, because that relationship there was no relationship in the developmental part as they grew up, there was nothing, there was no relationship in the developmental part, that they were either neglected or abused or put up on the pedestal, and who they actually were was completely ignored, was either ignored or suppressed. Right? And so that inner object, who am I, was not there. And because the parents, project, so we have the parent, because the parent, and me, let's say, there's the me, there's the me object, because the parent subsumes that and projects a false representation of who you are, then the individual, once the parent is no longer in the picture, right, then they continue to do that, because the parent is teaching, specifically those who put the child up on a pedestal, the parent is teaching the child, you are only worth something if you are a doctor, a lawyer, making millions of dollars, pounds, if you are the best, sort of thing. You're the best at playing the piano, the best at, your value comes from nothing but your not only your accomplishments, right? Your accomplishments, but here's what the narcissistic parent is doing to the child, right? The child, right? So here's the me, right? The child, if the child is wonderful, if the child is wonderful, the child is not wonderful because the child is wonderful. The child is wonderful because the parent is wonderful. You understand what I'm saying? So the child is irrelevant. The child is absolutely irrelevant. The child is wonderful only because the parent is wonderful, and the parent, look, I'm wonderful, I've got such wonderful children. It's a narcissistic supply, so the child is completely irrelevant. So that's why the child is so the child is like, I'm not me. So the child internalizes what he or she was to the parent and continues to project that on into the world, whether positive or whether negative. Right? And the positive, so putting up a child on a pedestal and also smashing them into the ground, is actually in a sense both the same thing, because both cross a boundary, as in they subsume the child under what they prefer. And in both senses, the parent is doing that in order to make themselves feel better, right? To gain narcissistic supply themselves. Now let's take the psychopath. Pardon me. Right? Let's take the psychopath. The psychopath is exactly opposite. So for the psychopath, you have person, 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 person. And there's nothing. There's no internal object whatsoever. That's why the psychopath will treat you literally no different to if you're a couch or or something to be used. There is nothing in here. And if there is nothing in here, if you don't internalize, and here's the problem, right? If you don't internalize the other person, there is no, you have nothing to empathize and relate to, right? They are like me. I bring you in, but I do not violate your autonomy as an external individual, because that relationship needs to happen. But because I've brought you into me and you're out there, I can, and it can be this two-way street, and I can empathize, and I can all of these kinds of things, right? But for the narcissist, he damages, the outside person does not exist, is only internal, so it's a solipsistic thing. It's you. So there can be no relationship because there's nothing outside. You might as well not. You might as well be a hologram as far as they don't care, right? And in a sense, you are almost like a hologram to them because they will only see of you what they have inside of you, sort of thing. Have inside themselves representation of you. So for a narcissist, if you behave in a way that surprises a narcissist, rather than be surprised like a normal person, be surprised and then update the model, the narcissist will actually get angry. It's like, why are you not behaving according to my internal model? And then they will try to force you to behave according to their internal model, because the model informs, it's the internal that informs the external, and the external never is never a point of reference. The point of reference is always inside. It's always internal. For the psychopath, it's then, like I said, it's directly opposite, right? Which is why, one of the reasons why a psychopath can look at you and analyze you so completely and utterly dispassionately, and then manipulate you to within an inch of your life, and you don't even know it. You don't even realize it. Because the psychopath has no... The reason why the psychopath can do that is because there is no internal model to conflict with what he is seeing. And this is one of the difficulties. Normal people, we have an internal model and an external model. A lot of the time fights happen because I'm a little bit narcissistic. Now, when I say normal people, you can either be fully narcissistic, like you can have, like, you're clinically diagnosable, or you can merely have the traits. And many people actually have the traits because we're so individualistic, right? The Western world today has become all about who? Me. And what I want, and what I think, and what I believe, and that's it. What I believe, that's why you have postmodernism. It's all about my truth, and it's my truth, and it's your truth, and never the two will have anything to do with each other. And that's narcissism, essentially. It's my truth, and my reality, and my interpretation. That's pure narcissism. Pure and unadulterated narcissism. But on average, the average person, when you've got a fight going on, a lot of the times, it is essentially a conflict, not only between end goals, but also between my internal conception of you. So, for example, a prime example, beautiful example. How many of you have seen the interview between Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman? Right? Prime example. Absolutely prime example. Kathy Newman had an internal object of who Jordan Peterson that had nothing to do with who Jordan Peterson actually was. Right? She had this internal, it's narcissistic. And whenever Jordan Peterson would say something, right, rather than listen to what he's saying and allow the external object to update the internal object, she would just turn it around and say, so what you're saying is, and then what she would say was nothing but the articulating what she had, her internal object. And it was only after a while of backwards, and a lot of people look at Jordan Peterson and they say, man, how does Jordan Peterson have the patience for this? It's because Jordan Peterson sits down and he looks at what she's doing and he knows immediately what's going on. He immediately recognizes that there's an object relations problem. And so when he's articulating and he's trying to get her to recognize it, say, listen, sweetheart, your internal object of me is not matching the external object that is actually me. And we saw then that period when she finally clicked, and she's like, where she was like, so you're not sitting there and saying that and then Jordan Peterson was like, gotcha. And she's like, yeah, you got me. And it was that moment where she suddenly clicked and she realized, hang on, I need to update this internal model of who Jordan Peterson is. But depending, I mean, I don't know her personally, but whether she later on did actually bother to update the internal model of him is then another story, because a lot of the times we are committed to a certain ideological representation of other people, and we're more interested in the ideological representation than we are of who the other person actually is. And this is the basis of things like sexism and racism and all of these kinds of things. And now here's the interesting thing, right? When we talk about things like sexism and racism and all of these kinds of things, they have a basis in reality. Why? Because there is something that is happening often enough. So something we call a stereotype. The reason we develop stereotypes is because we have the same experience often enough in order to know what to expect from this or that particular group. Right? Now, the problem with object relations and the individual person's ability to generalize is that, yes, it's okay to generalize, but when you are dealing with an individual, you then have to move from the generalization to the individual, right? And then you need to form an individual object of the individual you are dealing with, right? So just because someone is black, or just because someone is Brazilian, or just because someone is white or European, or whatever the case might be, does not mean that they are necessary, even though half of them, right? Even though half of them might all be exactly one particular way. Why? Because the vast majority of human beings do not think about what they're doing. There is something there's a term in psychology that is known as insight, right? Insight is the ability for you to look at yourself and understand what you're all about, and rather than behave automatically, you behave thoughtfully, right? So a lot of people, try this experiment. A lot of people, when you go out and you say, so why do you do that? I don't know. More often than not, you're going to get an I don't know, right? And even if the person has an answer, let's say you've got someone a little bit more thoughtful, right? If you ask, why do you do that? They'll say, because of this. All right, so why do you think that is true? And usually you will exhaust their explanations within 2 or 3 questions. Completely exhaust. Because most people don't think deeply about, why do I do this? What are the consequences? What are the, this belief, how does it play out in the world? In philosophy, we call it epistemological, the word. Epistemological self-consciousness is the word, right? Which is essentially, of all the things that you hold and take for granted, what are the consequences of that? And should you even hold to those things in the first place, right? Most people don't. So most people literally actually behave like robots, essentially, right? And because the majority of people behave like robots, okay, that is why stereotypes exist. Because the majority of people will not think individually, they will think culturally. Most people will not think individually, they will think culturally, or they will think ideologically, or whatever the case might be, and so they will all behave in the exact same way. They don't think, how do I really this, and how does it play out, and all that kind of stuff. Not that having a culture or an ideology or whatever the case might be is necessarily wrong, okay? Those things are necessary. What is bad is the fact that you hold to those things without questioning them, is basically then the problem. Right, and everyone does this, okay? Everyone does this. Religious people do it. Atheists do it. Everyone does it. Absolutely everyone does it, right? Sort of thing. So to go back to the psychopath, so the psychopath is only got objects, external objects. There are no internal objects, which is why, again, why the psychopath can't empathize, because there's also the me. The me doesn't exist. Also, doesn't really exist. The only thing he knows is what he wants, what he or she wants. That's it, right? The goal, I want that, what that, and you as an individual person, you're not a person. All you are either in the way, or you are not in the way, or you're gonna help me get to where I want to go. That is literally, you are literally that kind of an object, and there is no. So this is why a psychopath is generally, you know, not particularly surprised. So for example, let's say you've got someone who's a little bit psychopathic and a little, or let's take someone who's a sociopath, let's say who's a sociopath, and it's the same thing for a sociopath, right? So they, whatever internalizations they don't develop, they shut it down so that everything is just out there in the world. The world is over there and I'm protecting. It's actually, again, it's a defense mechanism, right? Because if I care, I can get injured, I can get hurt. So let me put a chasm between myself and everything else, and you're over there, you don't exist. So I don't exist, I might as well not exist. I don't put myself forward, and there's not even really, when I think of putting myself forward, there isn't really anything of myself to put forward, essentially. Which is again why a lot of the times they can be very again, it's a dysfunction. They can't have proper relationships because there's nothing of themselves to put in. The relationship is just a thing to do or to be done, or whatever the case. Everything is very, you know. So if you take like a sociopath, and a sociopath, let's say you've got a friend who's got sociopathic traits. Let's make it very mild. So sociopathic traits, and or a family member who's got sociopathic traits, and let's say you win an award, and you will come, oh look, I did well, I won my award and whatever, and you go to the sociopath, and the sociopath will be like, yeah, so what? And you will be like, how the hell can you say so? I did this wonderful thing. And the sociopath will be like, well, but I know you could, obviously you could do it. You've got this ability, you've got that ability, you're hardworking, whatever. Therefore, of course you won the award. I mean, why are you surprised that you won the award? Of course you won the award, because you are like this and like this and like that, right? Because they've analyzed you and they know what to expect from you. And you will go from that encounter thinking, you know, what a miserable son of a gun. He doesn't want to congratulate me and whatever. And this is the problem even with a sociopath who realizes I'm a bit of a sociopath and I need to develop a relationship with people. The sociopath has to learn how to praise people as if, and be excited, even though everything to him, even though that it's like, well, it's obvious, of course you won the award. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's very, very interesting to deal with a sociopath who realizes this and is like, you know, usually you get excited because you thought it couldn't happen, or it wouldn't happen. It's the excitement is usually aroused by surprise. Oh, I got the award. I didn't. I was anticipating. I didn't know if I was gonna get it. And the sociopath is like, well, of course, you know, if you do this and this and this, then that. They're very, very. Or if this, then this, then this, then that. And interestingly enough, the way an autistic person thinks is actually very, very similar, right? So this autistic friend of mine, they're like, bloody hell, I'm not a sociopath, obviously, but I think that way. Very, very mathematical. If this, then this, then this, then that. And it's very, very rigid. So for the autistic person, the boundaries are actually highly rigid. So for example, one of the reasons why autistic people struggle, and this is what this person was actually telling me, said, I struggle to see to identify other people's faces. Why? Because a person's face changes all the time, right? From one moment to the next, a person's making different expressions and stuff like that. Whereas for the autistic person, it's like, if it's not in this box, then it's something else. Their categories of what things are or are not are too rigid. And so for the autistic person, it's a little bit more the case. This individual was telling me that the reason they struggle with things, like for example, on their plate, and you get this with obsessive compulsive disorder as well. So this particular autistic person is like, the peas must be there, and that must be there, and that must be there, and they mustn't touch, or everything has to be exactly in place. And if an autistic person walks into a room and sees the room, walks out of the room, and you move the chair from over here to over there, one chair, and they walk into the room, as far as they're concerned, it's a completely different room. It's a totally different room, right? That's because the internal object is so rigid that the ability to generalize is not there. And that's why it's such a problem. So why autistic people need the absolutely strict routines, and everything must always be the same and stuff like. And it's the same thing with parents. Parents that raise autistic kids will find it out that that they must always wear the same kind of clothing every single day. Mothers of autistic children often have a hard time because they can't go to the beauty salon and do a new hairstyle or do a new this or do a new that, because then the child freaks out. The reason why the child freaks out is because their internal object of you is so rigid that even if you cut your hair a little bit, you are no longer the same person. They freak out. It's almost like the object permanence is not there in a way. It's very interesting. It's very interesting, which is why I love having these conversations with my autistic friend, because if you actually sit down and just let the person talk, you find out amazing, really astonishing things. And then I found out in myself, what a lot of people don't realize is that attention deficit disorder, there's a high correlation of people who have ADD in their youth of developing personality disorders later on in life when they become adults. So a lot of people believe that ADD tapers off as you become an adult, but that's actually, in a way, that's wrong, because the ADD is not tapering off, it's merely evolving into a personality disorder, basically. And depending on the person's profile and experience and all these kinds of things, then they will fall into one of those categories. And then, so for example, yeah, and so then that's where you get the problem with people with ADD. A lot of people with ADD have behavioral problems and all that kind of stuff. So let's say, for example, let's say you take someone with attention deficit disorder, and he's got a little bit of an object relations issue. So let's say you've got the category of authority. I'm going to put there a authority, right? In this category of authority, let's say what are the first authority figures in everyone's life? It's their parents. It's their parents. Their parents form the object that is known as authority, right? So all other authority figures will be treated in the same way as the. So if the child does not trust the parents, the child thinks that if the parents give the child the impression that authority is not to be trusted, if authority is abusive, if authority is all of these negative things, they will get a concept, the internal object of authority is that authority cannot be trusted, authority is only out to destroy me, to put me down, and therefore they will go out into the world and they will have problems with authority. But they don't have problems with that particular authority What they don't realize is that the problem is not with that authority there. The problem is with this original authority that gave them the object of all authority, the category of authority, the object of authority. And so then there is a failure for the child to recognize, well, that authority is a different person, right? It's not just so you have then a very sort of black and white thinking where that person, rather than seeing the individual, IND, right? The individual can be an authority figure. They can be a friend. They can be a parent. They can be whoever, right? They fail. They will not see this. If they see that, then all those fall away, and they only see, this person's got an authority, therefore treat them problem. And so you have the same issue, for example, with MGTOW. MGTOW. That's wrong. MGTOW. So men going their own way, right? Men going their own way, they say basically women cannot be trusted, and therefore we're going to go our own way. Is basically voluntary celibacy, no interest in women whatsoever, because when the relationship falls apart, the government is biased towards men, and this woman who's basically not worked a day in your life is going to take everything and so on and so forth. So the problem with MGTOW, with men involved in MGTOW, is rather than recognize that their category of woman is wrong, right? Their category of woman is wrong. Their problem is that they don't choose good woman, right? That's the problem with men in MGTOW. They are either unwilling or unable, most likely unable, to choose good woman in order to not end up. So for them, the object of woman, the category of woman, is bad object. Bad object. Bad object, right? And a lot of the time, this could actually just represent their mothers. Right? Because a lot of I see it a lot. If you go to a MGTOW video where the guy is talking about how women are this and this and that and whatever, and you read the comments, it's very telling how many of these men talk about their mothers and how their mothers related badly with their fathers. Right, a lot of them, unbelievable, actually. A lot of them will relate how, oh yeah, I saw, my mother used to be an absolute this and this and that to my father, and I'm not going to go down that mistake. And most likely, the mother had a personality disorder. And it might be even that the father had a personality disorder, because people with personality disorders tend to attract. So it might be that the mother was a narcissist and the father was a codependent, or the mother was a borderline and the father was just weak, right? And didn't know how to manage her properly, or whatever the case might be, right? And so it's from this relationship informed woman as bad object. And it is the same thing. It is the same thing with feminism. Right? Same thing with feminism, right? Man is bad object. Is bad object. Right? Man is bad object. Why? Because they've got, and so why is man bad object? Is because of, you've got failed relationships. Failed relationships. You've got family abuse. family abuse, all kinds of things, right? Rhetoric. So let's say, for example, their father was irrelevant or weak, or if the woman didn't have a good example of a man in her life, she will believe the rhetoric, right? She will believe the rhetoric that all men are bad, and because she does not have a strong enough internal object of what a man is like in order for that to contradict the rhetoric, right? And you will and you can see this straight away. So every time if you see there's a feminist video on YouTube and in the comment section you have women come up and say, this is rubbish, this is absolute nonsense, my father was a decent man, my husband is a decent man, my this would, straight away you know that this is an object relations problem. The feminists are carrying on the way they are because their category of men is bad object, and these women, my father, the first one, my father was good, my brothers are good, and if all the men and these men established that men is good object in their minds, right? And that's and that's basically how it is. And when you have this a problem, when you have a psychological disorder, you have all or nothing thinking, all or nothing. Right? So to the question, so if you ask a woman about the category of men, good or bad, that's all they know. That's all they know. They do not even entertain the idea that the category of men can be both. Right? And how do you determine? You determine based on the individual. Right? And it is the same thing, right? If you ask men about woman, the category of woman, good or bad object, right? Good or bad object, for them it's either good or all good or all bad. It's all or nothing, right? And you get that with people who have psychological disorders or were not raised right or any kind of disturbance in this. Right? And this comes from the parents. This is why parents, you got to be careful, because at no point do they entertain that woman, that you've got good woman and you've got bad woman. Right? Simply can't. It might be true. Here's the problem. Here's where the problem lies, right? The reason why we're getting to know in this all or nothing thinking is because it is absolutely true that most people are rubbish. Most people. Right? I would go as far as to say everyone. Because we all take our object relation issues and we force it upon the other person all the time. We do not listen, we do not take in, we do not allow others to update our models, we do not. It's the whole relationship domain. Right? Now, by the way, there's a lot more that can be said about this. Okay? But I'm just bringing out what for me was the most useful, the most salient, and what for my friends, because I don't only have autistic friends, I've got friends with other issues as well, you know, and this is one of the things that has helped them the most, recognizing, when I get upset about something, let me stop and think, hang on, maybe my internal representation here is wrong. Maybe that's, and by giving it the name of object relations theory, kind of puts it's very helpful, especially like I found for autistic people, because if they can give it a label, a definite thing that helps them, this is a real thing I'm dealing with, and you know, it gives them something tangible, and because it's part of the psychological profession, it gives the sense of credibility and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very helpful to actually understand this. Most people are rubbish, right? It's absolutely true. Most people are rubbish. We do not treat each other properly. We're selfish. And this is it. So this idea, this this idea that humans are essentially good is rubbish, is false, is absolute nonsense. Humans are not essentially good. If we were, there is just absolutely no way whatsoever that we would have not only the amount of trauma that we have in life, but the amount of just degeneracy that we have out in the world, and all of these issues. So, for example, even if we take then the borderline personality disorder and the histrionic, so the reason why they call it borderline, well, one of the reasons, of course, is that they actually do have, a person with borderline actually does have the internal and the external object, but they regularly confuse the two. Right. So for a person with borderline personality disorder, and I would say even histrionic, in many ways. So there's the inner object, right? There's the person, and there's the external person, right? It's very, very often that they confuse, that they will project this themselves out to there, without letting that project the internal upon the external, or then confuse the external with themselves. So for example, if we take the me, right, me, my identity, right? So a person with borderline will often project, to a degree like a narcissist, will project, not always, but again, it's will often, but usually if there is shame or guilt involved, or whatever the case might be, as a defense mechanism, they will project the inner to the outer, and then in other ways, they will actually behave very much like a codependent, and rather than have a stable sense of who they are, they will allow or try to inform themselves of who they are solely by the use of external stimulus. So, for example, a person with borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder will very, very regularly go through phases of having an identity crisis. Now, borderline narcissism and psychopathy, antisocial, is mostly men, even though you can have obviously narcissistic women, psychopathic women and stuff. It's a lot more uncommon, but it can happen, right? There is always overlap, but borderline and histrionic is overwhelmingly woman, even though you can get men in that category as well. So which is why I talk in this sort of gendered way, right? Not because exclusively that gender. So for example, if you see a woman with borderline personality disorder, they will very very regularly go through cycles of having an identity crisis, where the me, they lose sense of who the me is. They lose sense of who the me is. The me disappears. Who am I, right? And it's in those situations where you will see the woman, they will go out and they will dye their hair in these neon colors, right? They will go and buy new clothing. They will change their look, right? They will go have plastic surgery, all kinds of things to try and this is why you have something called identity politics in the world. The main driver of identity politics, regardless of race or creed, is woman, right? The main drivers of identity politics are woman. And so, for example, when you see out there some woman with this bright neon red hair, overweight, whatever the case might be, going completely nuts that men are this and men are that and men are whatever the case might be, you understand straight away there's a problem with the self-identity first and foremost, there's a huge problem with self-identity there. That is why these women, rather than be an individual, they put themselves into different groups that from which they can inherit an identity, which is why you then have identitarian politics. It's because I am a woman of color with 5 disabilities and buck teeth and trans, whatever the case. That's why there's this list. That's why they falsely use these physical features as part of the identity, because because they've lost sight of what's inside. The inside is not there. So who am I? Oh, well, I'm black and I'm transgender and I'm this and those things. They might be a part of who you are, or whatever, but they aren't who you are, sort of thing. Blue hair is not who you are, and this is desperate attempts to try and wrestle some kind of a self-identity, sort of thing. Right, and so that's, first of all, that's the first thing you realize, and then also with these personality issues, again, with the exception in a lot of ways to the psychopath, there's a lot of depression and all of these kinds of things, which is why these social justice sort of feminist types tend to be overweight, because with depression you then get overeating, and then a lot of the medication for depression and all that kind of stuff actually causes you to put on quite a significant amount of weight. So the first thing you realize is that there's an identity problem there straight away. There's a huge identity problem, which is why they mindlessly follow these movements, these ideological movements out there in the world, or they champion. This is why veganism has become a source of a person's identity, and it's just one identitarian movement after another. And this is nothing new. Back in the day, you had the goths, the punk rockers, the grungers. You had at one point there was an epidemic of anorexia amongst girls back in the 80s or the 90s. This absolute suddenly every girl and her dog had anorexia. Why? It's an identitarian thing. It was, and because a lot of them, as soon as the fad was over, boom, the anorexia was gone, and only those with true. And by the way, I actually know someone very, very close to me. Again, I know I know a lot of very, very strange people. Again, I know someone who was a genuine anorexic, absolutely genuine anorexia nervosa, nearly killed her. And she just, when she sees these people go on about a lot of them with this faux anorexia that comes as a result of vanity, right? Out of this vainglorious wanting to subscribe to this identitarian thing. It is she gets absolutely sick and tired of it, because this it delegitimizes genuine issues, and you get then the same thing. So this is why these groups are also completely and utterly obsessed with fat shaming and this shaming and that shaming, right? Because what are they doing? The rage is that projection, is the projection out. Don't fat shame me, don't this shame me, don't. They actually feel shame inside. Right? You cannot shame a person who does not feel shame. Impossible, right? Absolutely and utterly impossible. You cannot do it, right? And this is let this be a mantra that people adopt. You cannot shame someone who doesn't already feel You cannot shame someone who does not already feel shame. So when they're going around, you cannot shame this and shame that and shame the next thing. It's straight away, because this is then one of the difference that you see with with people who do not have these psychological issues, these object relational issues and all that kind of stuff, and don't, well, pardon me, struggle with issues of shame and guilt and all these, which is inherent in these kinds of things, because there was trauma and there was problems growing, pardon me, and problems and traumas growing up in their youth and stuff like that. The normal person will be like, yeah, I'm fat, so what? Who cares, right? Most men are like that, right? Well, yeah, I'm fat, and that's the price I pay for drinking beer. I don't care, right? That's how healthy people healthy, right? Because if you're fat, you know, right? But the guy who's got this big beer belly, who's quite content that drinking beer is that a beer belly is the price of drinking beer, he's like, listen, cost benefit here. There's cost, and all right. So I want to keep drinking beer. Therefore, I'm gonna just, and you know, you want to call me fat? Cool. Then I'm fat. Who cares, right? Sort of thing. Because they don't feel shame. They're like, I'm this way because I want to be. There's an identity. I'm secure with who I am. Who I am, whether good or bad or whatever the case might be, has nothing to do with the fact that I've got a beer belly, with the fact that I've got a bit of weight or whatever the case might be. It's that simple, right? And it's this object. Again, there's a lot of this sort of issues, which is why again, going back to the activists, it's this, you can't talk to them. It's a rage. Anyone who's ever lived with a person with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder or any of these things, you know that if you disagree with them, you get nothing but this rage. It's just you can't. It's like this person turns into a demonic possession thing and off they go, right? And that's exactly what you see with this leftist protesting and all that kind of stuff. The modern political domain, right, within the past, since Obama first started coming into power, and then Obama's 2 terms, and now with Trump and all that kind of stuff, the whole thing is one massive display of what happens when massive groups of people with psychological problems get together and go rampant on a society. Absolutely rampant on a society, right? So, and here's the problem, right? One of the mistakes that people make on the conservative side, or whatever the case might be, when they look at that, we want to mock and we want to wear. But here's something we need to understand: these people didn't choose to be that way. They are that way because someone failed them. Okay, their parents, and most primarily, their parents failed them. Their parents failed them. Right, for whatever reason, because narcissists beget narcissists, psychopaths beget psychopaths, and so on and so forth. And for histrionic personality disorder, for example, histrionic personality disorder, one of the key, most stark features is inappropriate and over-the-top displays in order to gain attention, right? Because again, they require the external to endow them with a sense of identity, and there's a bit of and the personalities also, there's a bit of narcissism in there, a bit of people must look at me and stuff like that, and the whole slut walk movement, right? The entire slut walk movement, that is just one beautiful example of what it's like when you get together a whole bunch of people with histrionic personality disorder and release them on the streets. Right, the same thing, in fact, right? So when you think about histrionic and borderline personality disorder being more commonly feminine disorders, but you get the males that usually then have those kinds of disorders tend to be more effeminate. And this is why, if you go to, let's say, a gay pride, what do you see? Nothing but histrionic behavior, left, right, and center. Left, right, and center, and people take their children to those. So men walking around in next to nothing, wearing S&M stuff on the street. What possible reason under the sun do you have to wear S&M, crotch leather, whatever stuff on the streets? There is no, in any, so this is the thing, right? When we have the slut walks and we have the gay pride marches, stuff that would otherwise get you arrested is suddenly permitted to be done in public, right? And that is how the modern mind has been completely and utterly distorted, because we are under the false impression, and this again is the political sphere, we are under the false impression that all homosexual people agree with what's going on at gay pride. Many homosexuals do not agree with what's going on in gay pride, and I know many. I've actually known a lot of gay people for a straight guy. Maybe that says something about me. Yeah? I've really known a lot of gay people for a straight guy. That's very weird. Because most people that I know have only ever known like one in their whole lives, and I've known like 10 or 20. Yeah, that's a very interesting little thing that's dawned on me. I've actually lived for about a year or more with a transgender person. That was a very interesting experience, right? It was actually a very nice guy. And by guy, I mean male, biological male, who in the evenings dressed up as a woman. We actually got along fairly well, interestingly enough. Yeah, we just he was a lot more tidy than I was, and so we clashed a lot in terms of tidiness, right? Sort of thing. But yeah, that was in. I've actually lived with a transgender person. That was quite an interesting experience, sort of thing. Anyway. So yeah, you see the histrionic movement, again, complete. There's no identity, and they identify. And here's the problem. When you think about histrionic, one of the things that is common to histrionic personality disorder is inappropriate displays of sexuality, completely and utterly inappropriate displays of sexuality, which, by the way, it's borderline women and histrionic women that are getting all these men into trouble for sexual harassment, when chances are they were the ones that were quite happy to go and do that in the first place. Because one of the things, if you're dealing with a borderline or a histrionic woman, when you're not giving her attention, she gives you grief for not giving her attention, and when you are giving her attention, she wants to give you grief for giving her attention. So you can never win, right? So if you're ignoring me, you're terrible for ignoring me. If you give me attention, leave me alone. You're invading my space, right? It's this constant push-pull dynamic that will never end unless the individual realizes, listen, I've got a problem, and goes and gets help, sort of thing. But so the problem is, so these women that basically behave like sluts, right, is because there is a problem with the internal object that is male or that is father. The internal object is damaged, and so they're seeking approval, male attention, right, which is why they behave in sexually inappropriate ways. Chances are there was sexual abuse, so that made them think that their only value in life, so their internal object of themselves is sex object, literally. Is I'm a sex object, and this is how I gain attention and approval. Because one thing that people don't realize, if I am not seen, I don't exist, right? Because that's how it is for the child, right? Why does the child start crying when you leave the room, right? Because to not be seen is to die, because the infant relies on getting people's attention, because the infant is helpless. I need literally everyone to do everything, to wipe my backside, to feed me, to do literally everything, which is good and appropriate for an infant, but it is not good and appropriate for an adult, right? And this is why when you see the social justice warriors saying, you're denying my existence, right? Do you not hear from that a lot? It's because of this. You're denying my existence. The inner object of who I am so for example, remember we said me and mom, right? They did not detach. did not detach. So their identity depends on the other all the time. They did not individuate. Okay? There was no individuation there. So that's why you have to acknowledge me, but what they don't understand in their mind is that if I'm not seen or if I'm not acknowledged, then I don't exist. I die. That's literally, there's you don't want to, it's virtually literate. It's virtually literally that if they're not seen and acknowledged, it's because they're dead. They die, right? That's why they need that. So when you are seeing the slut walks or the gay pride parades, they are not content with simply being accepted. Yeah, you go ahead and do your own thing and I'll be over here and do my thing. No. You have to like it, and you have to acknowledge it, and you have to have, and they'll, if they were allowed, they'd probably start to, you have to at least have one gay friend in your life, to the point, right, where some are even saying that to be heterosexual, right, is homophobia, right? That unless I'm bisexual, I'm discriminating. That's how bad it is. That's how bad it gets. Because we need to understand there's no logic, there's no rationale. These people, all they know is this internal object, and the internal object that is me. It's either there or underdeveloped or doesn't exist, or it's external, right? So the me, so for a person who so you get, right, so for most people will have a me internally, right? For a person with some of these personality disorders, the me is out here. The me is not in here, and therefore the me and the person, the external person, are one and the same thing, right? And that is why they need to force you in order to, it's like the child crying for its mother, in a sense, right? They force you to participate in whatever it is they're doing. You're forced to, because if you don't, then it's because they don't exist. You're denying their existence and all that kind of stuff. And this is how absolutely tragic and dreadful it's a tragedy. A lot of people, and I understand the sentiment that a lot of people want to mark, and people want to devalue, dehumanize, and all these kinds of things. But we need to recognize that these people are injured, and that all of us, every single one of us, will at some point in life, when we deal with another person in an unfair way, it's because a lot of time is because of this kind of thing, right? Because we might have had bad experiences in the past, we might have had whatever, so the internal object and the external object are almost like in a dialectic. They're always in conflict with each other, right? And you have the same thing with the race thing. I have an internal concept of my particular race or this particular race, and then there's the external race, and then these internal objects go off at each other. And the fact that we behave in stereotypical ways does not help those objects to make peace with each other a lot of the times, which is why you have to behave like an individual. Right? And that's when you start getting this things like white privilege and all that kind of stuff, where the black community that has legitimately been traumatized to within an inch of its life, right, in the United States, from slavery and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people want to dispute. They say, no, there's no such thing as a legacy of slavery. That's actually not true. There is such thing as a legacy of slavery, but the legacy of slavery is primarily psychological and not economic. It's primarily psychological, right, and not economic. There's a reason why there's more violence in those communities. There's a reason why there's the families have broken apart in those communities, etc., etc., etc. That's why. Because personality disorders I was talking about, narcissistic, psychopathic, borderline, histrionic, those people are more likely than not to end up in prison, or abusing drugs, or being alcoholics, and etc., 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 being homeless, not being able to hold down a job, not having good friends, not having good relationships, and all that kind of stuff. And you don't even have to be full on of that psychological problem. Even if you just have the traits, let's say your life was not traumatic enough, for example, to make that manifest as a clinical entity that you receives a diagnosis. You could even just have the traits, and even just having the traits is enough to severely impact your life, severely impact your life, to the point where that's why it's called a disorder, right? It's a personality. If your personality is disordered, you will not be able to order your life and your life with others and your relationship with others. So that's basically, ladies and that's basically object relations theory for you. Basically, right? They can go. I'm going to put a link up in the descriptions below so you can read more about it and go. I encourage you, because again, I'm not fully this, I might have got some stuff wrong, some nuances wrong. This is all very nuanced and stuff like that. But it's so important we recognize this, especially as parents, because when that child is 0, it's just been born, it's already learning from you. And if you holding your baby and in your mind you're like, this is inconvenient, the baby knows straight away, right? If the baby is born to a surrogate mother, the baby knows. The child knows, because the woman is going to treat this child not like part of her, but as this foreign object that she's selling off, right? That's why having children who are unwanted or by accident is a problem. Because part of the pregnancy, because I'm actually, and the literature supports this, even before the child is born, the mother's psychological state is affecting the child, right? That is why I do not agree with surrogacy, unless you have a relationship with unless there is maybe at the most you have the surrogate is like a member of your family or something like that, a cousin that's a deep relationship with, and but even then, no, it's not a good idea. And then when the child is born, I'm sorry, the child's got to have a mother, the child has got to have a father. Absolutely essential. There is no substitute for it, right? And if you do not follow the prescribed way that nature, if you are an atheist, or God, if you are a religious person, if you do not follow that prescribed way, the internal object, female as a category, male as a category, me as a male in relation to that, me as a female in relation to the female, and me as a female in relation to the male, or me as a male in relation to the male, me as a female in relation to the female, that object relation, if that is messed up, you're going to have problems, and you are setting your child up from the beginning to have problems, have massive problems later on in life. And it doesn't mean that you can't grow up and be successful. There's a lot of, let's put it this way. Narcissism is a predictor of success in the business world, in the corporate world, right? If you go and you look at the people, all the people, rich people in Hollywood, Trump, all the people in the political sphere, most of them are narcissists, right? So we cannot say that because you have a disorder that it means your life is necessarily going to fall apart, because you can, as a psychopath and a narcissist, you can be very, very successful, and many are. It does not mean that that's good for you or for the world, for the rest of the world either, right? Because we see what these corporations are like, we can see what the political system is like, and that is all down to bad circumstances, or bad circumstances that parents, through no fault of their own, find themselves in during the developmental phase of the child, that there's a war, something goes on, and there's problems, the parents are distracted, or the parents are just downright rubbish parents, right? This idea of woman being at home, breastfeed for the first month or two, and then bugger off to work every single day. The child is literally has been abandoned. That is what the child feels. And the child, from that point, I am a bad object. I was abandoned, and will live the rest of their lives believing that. Struggling with that object. Bad object, I was abandoned. Right? That individuation came too soon. And so that child is going to, for the rest of their life, is going to want approval from other people. Right? The primary caregiver needs to be there for the whole, all the way up till 4 years old at least, right? And women who are selfish, who think of nothing but their careers and not their children, are doing this. I used to be an au pair. And I saw this time and time and time again. Both the parents bugger off to work, basically abandoned, and this has been since the children have been raised by nothing but nannies and au pairs their entire life, and nannies and au pairs cycle. So the primary, ends up being the primary caregiver, is never actually the primary caregiver. It's a constant cycle, recycle. It's always a new au pair or a new nanny or whatever the case might be, right? And the children are abandoned. And I saw these psychological issues developing. I saw kids as young as 6 years old demonstrate more narcissism than I've seen in some adults. I was horrified seeing what it was like. And it was rich parents. They provided these children with every material thing that they could possibly. These kids wanted for nothing. The best schools that you could imagine, everything. Right? I had the best car to drive these kids around in, to all their things and stuff like that. And what did these parents never give the children? They never gave of themselves. They were only interested in the career. And those parents are gonna, if they haven't already, they're gonna live to regret it. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. And we need to see these things. And if you're an adult now, think about these things in yourself. What in my past made me feel is giving me these relationship problems. Any relationship between your parents, between your whatevers, all that kind of stuff is going to be a problem. And then once you know what kind of relationship there is, then maybe you can deal with it, right? Then maybe you can deal with it. Because I know a lot of people have been like, man, that's exactly what my parents are like. There's no relationship. All they're interested in is, I'm your mother, therefore do what I say. That there's nothing beyond that. There's no they only, and here is specifically for Christian people to be aware of, right? What is one of the 10 commandments? Honor your father and mother. That is the narcissistic parent's favorite verse in the entire Bible. Right? It gives the narcissistic parent the excuse to establish no relationship with you whatsoever, to treat you in whatever way they think, and yet still imagine that they have the prerogative to demand things that they have no right demanding of you. And they use the religion that was never meant for that as a means of coercion on their kids. I see it all the time. I'm your mother. I'm your father. Do as I say. Do as I say, not as I do. And we forget that if the God of the universe leads by example, then so should parents. And if parents do not lead by example, they have absolutely no right demanding anything other than what they've exemplified from their kids. None whatsoever. Right? If you have a problem with your children, it starts at your doorstep, and you need to own it. It starts with you. You are the one that taught them to be that way, whether you like it or not. And maybe your narcissism is getting in the way of recognizing that. Right? So many parents out there, I've been a wonderful parent. I've done my best. Have you really? Or is I've done my best merely an excuse to to calm the shame and the guilt. Because you get this, isn't it? When you see a child that's misbehaving and doing this and is a problem child, what do the parents immediately do? Oh, well, you can't, who are you to tell us how to raise? You get nothing but narcissistic rage. Who are you to say? And we are loving and we are this. Immediately defensive, defensive, defensive. You can't tell those parents anything, no matter what kind of a miscreant the child ends up being. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today. I hope this helps. And see you next time. God bless. Cheerio. Bye. Oh, by the way, any questions, feel free to ask. Tell me thank you, or you're an idiot, that was all wrong. Go ahead. Let me know. All right. Cheers. Thank you very much. Goodbye.